Craft cocktails, from the classics to zero-proof drinks, are all around us. But what if we told you that craft cocktails are actually a relatively recent addition to the culinary scene? My name is Toni Tipton-Martin, and I'm the editor-in-chief of Cook's Country at America's Test Kitchen. I want to introduce you to a podcast mini-series I'm hosting called 100 Proof, The Journey of the American Cocktail. Over 6 episodes, we'll look at how mixed drinks offer us a window into what was happening in America during the dawn of the cocktail. We'll then take you to the present day to contemplate what forces led to our modern cocktail renaissance. And along the way, we'll of course be sharing cocktail recipes with you. Subscribe to Proof from America's Test Kitchen so you won't miss the first episode. It drops on Thursday, May 23rd. Again, that's Proof, Proof, from America's Test Kitchen. Cheers.
You're listening to Heritage Radio Network.
So you don't charm the devil with your rock and roll load. Knows that country music's gonna save your soul. The devil runs his groove in them rhythm and blues that sand. It's gonna get you sun in the air.
Welcome back to the Speakeasy. I'm Sother Teague.
And I'm Greg Benson.
Hey, buddy.
Hey, man.
How you feeling today?
I'm feeling great, actually. I probably better than I should. I escaped what might have been a justified hangover. How are you? Well, I know you don't get them, but how are you doing today?
I'm feeling great. Got up quite early to wash a absolute shit ton of dishes.
Why were you doing that, Sother?
The holiday weekend was here, and so I went to a barbecue at my buddy Tim's place, Tim McCurdy from Vine Pair. And then was going to host one at my place on the actual holiday on Monday, but it rained all day, so I pushed it till yesterday and had a group of 10 or so people over, including yourself. And I would like to clarify and point out, I'm from the South, and when I say barbecue, I mean it, right? Tim smoked some meats, mostly chicken, and a bit of pork. And yesterday I smoked an absolute crap ton of pork.
It was a mountain of pork, an embarrassment of pork was what we had.
An embarrassment of pork. Yes. I started the smoker at 7:30 a.m. and we ate at around 7 p.m. So pretty close to a 12-hour cook. And I did St. Louis ribs and spare ribs. And then I did a 10-pound pork shoulder and made Carolina style chopped barbecue as well as Kansas City style ribs.
And it was great. It was great. I mean, I was there, obviously. If you, the listener, haven't picked up on that little detail yet, I got to come along. I got to eat some of the said ribs, some pulled pork, Carolina style barbecue sauce, which is my absolute fave. And it was just nice. It was great to, be able to actually hang out with you in 3 dimensions and see some people and just share some good times and some good food and some good drinks.
Yeah, I consider myself quite fortunate to be in New York and have, I don't want to make the listener think a liar of us, but like when we say backyard, I have a backyard. I know that my friends in Des Moines, Iowa are thinking to themselves, what the American might picture as a backyard.
Well, they're probably thinking grass is probably what they're thinking.
First of all, mine is entirely concrete. It's basically like the size of 2 3/4 parking spaces. But I got a nice table out there, enough chairs to seat 12 or so. I got plenty of room for a smoker. So it's nice to have that, and it's also quite unusual. I've lived in New York for pushing 25 years, and I've never had a backyard at all, much less a private space. So you can only get to this space by going through my apartment. So I feel pretty fortunate to have that available to me and have people over. But we had a lot of great food. We also had a few drinks. Greg, you made us a drink towards the end.
I did make us a drink toward the end. I made us a Blueberry Mojito, the recipe of which came from the winner of our Make Us a Blueberry Mojito contest.
Yes.
So Krysia Rodak, you heard it here first. Congratulations. And thank you for your recipe. Yours was our absolute favorite of all the ones that we got. Yeah. I believe it's called the Wild Child was your specific name for it. Really tasty, involves a wild blueberry syrup that you sort of put at the bottom of the drink, which gives it this cool kind of like layered effect, which is nifty. So we're going to be featuring that during the seminar that I'm hosting with Dr. Nicola Nice at Tales of the Cocktail. That is going to be our 3rd of 3 drinks that we're offering. That means, Krysia, you also win a signed copy of Dr. Nice's new book, The Cocktail Parlor, How Women Brought the Cocktail Home. So DM me your address, I guess, and we'll get that out to you. But also thank you, because it was a very tasty cocktail and I got to share it with some friends last night and it was delightful. The blueberry syrup did explode in my backpack on the way over, but Krysia, I'm not going to hold that against you. That's not your fault.
Yeah, that's clearly your fault, Greg.
Don't say the quiet part out loud, Sother.
But it was a delicious cocktail and timely. Yesterday was a nice, warm, early summer day here in New York City, so it was great.
Oh, it was beautiful. Yeah. And speaking of delicious fruits as berries are, I did do a little bit of Googling on this just before the show. I got curious because of our guest. I was like, are olives a berry? And they're not. They're not a berry. The tomato is technically a berry, interestingly enough. But olives are technically a stone fruit. So they're in the peach, plum, and apricot family. And the reason that I'm talking about all of this is because joining us in the studio today, live from his basement that looks like a sort of honky-tonk dive bar, we have E.T., not the extraterrestrial, but Eric Tecosky, the founder of Dirty Sue Olive Brine. E.T., thank you so much for joining us. It's good to see you.
Good to see you. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, of course. So you talk to us about this basement, first of all. I mean, we're going to get into olive brine, everyone's favorite stone fruit in a second, but just this looks like a movie set. Like this looks like what's going on here? Yeah. Walk me through how it got to be this way.
So my wife and I moved from LA to Atlanta about, 2.5 years ago. And it was during the pandemic. And because of said pandemic, you needed to have somewhere to Zoom and do all this kind of stuff. And I figured the basement would be the quietest, but it's an unfinished basement. So I figured I'd finish it, or at least the part I needed. And I guess having had a basement in the 70s, I had a little nostalgia for that. So I put some paneling up and some Christmas lights and some record playing players and records and all that. You can't see all of that, but I actually have it over the years have been, my parents moved from my childhood home down to the city of Philadelphia, so they had much less room. They're in a condo, or my mom's in the condo, and she stopped listening to her records because she had no room to have them. So I've been slowly bringing her collection, and it's pretty amazing. However, I had two what I thought were original Sgt. Peppers, and I'm like, I don't need two. So I called a buddy of mine who's a record guy. I'm like, could I sell an original Sgt. Pepper and buy a new stereo? He's like, yeah, fuck yeah, you could. And he's like, send me the, he's like, take a picture of the inside, where the record would say Sgt. Pepper on the inside. There's a bit of a black ring in between that and where if you had a 45, where that little would go. And he's like, sorry, dude. He goes, these were not printed in 67. They were printed in 76. So I don't know why my mother has two copies of Sgt. Pepper from 76 and not 67, but they're worth about $20. So I did not buy a new record player with the sale of these copies.
Still great to have that kind of stuff, right?
Bought a new USB cable to hook up your existing stereo system with that.
Yeah.
But yeah, I was kind of bummed out because I'm like, wow, that's amazing. But she has every Beatles record. I just assumed they were bought chronologically, but apparently maybe she wore out Sgt. Pepper and bought a new one.
Dang.
Yeah, who knows, right? Like got lost in a move or something.
Yeah, I don't think she remembers either, so that's part of the problem.
I'm Lou Bank.
And I'm Greg Benson.
And this is an ad for Ancestral Agave Syrup, the critically acclaimed award-winning syrup that helps gringo bartenders better make margaritas, Negronis,
Lou, hold up. Wait,
old
are you just
fashions?
This is how you start your podcast.
What?
It's not an ad for Ancestral Agave Syrup.
Well, of course it is. I'm just cutting costs by not paying writers to make something new. I'm just using an old script.
You pay writers?
Is that some kind of jab?
No, I'm just saying that.
What are you saying?
Well, look, we've got this amazing syrup that's made in an ancestral manner, cooked down from the sap of the agave, harvested the way these families would to make pulque. It's a quality product. It deserves a quality presentation.
Yeah, okay, hang on. Ancestral agave syrup is made by real families following traditional methods. Unlike the industrial Blue Weber syrup you get everywhere else, Ancestral is cooked down from agua miel, harvested from Salmiana in Hidalgo, Mexico. It is the grade A Vermont maple to the sticky diner syrup you've been using for your cocktails. Ingredients matter, both in how your cocktail tastes and how you treat the earth. Ancestral is better for both. Is that good?
Sure. Or maybe confusing instead of cheesy. Look, just visit ancestralagave.com to learn more and to order your world-class agave syrup today.
And we'll call that a wrap. Catch you next ad, Greg.
Hasta pronto?
Ancestral Agave Syrup. Available online at ancestralagave.org and wherever Greg and Lou are able to coerce store owners into carrying it.
Well, let's talk about drinks. Obviously, you like cocktails. You're here on our show. That's what we talk about the most. So what sort of is the origin story of your sort of love of drinks and drinking? And then how did that then turn into a job?
Yeah, I moved out to LA right after college and had this really good opportunity to work with an old friend, and things went great for about 6 months. We sold a show to NBC and then realized that we had kind of grown apart during our college years, and the whole thing fell apart and we kind of parted ways, and I needed a job. So I was at a birthday party at this nightclub that not even like kind of a lounge, I guess not really a club. And when I was leaving, I said thanks to the bartender because he was giving the birthday guy shots. And I was like, oh, do you need any help here? He's like, doing what? I'm like, the guy that does stuff for you. He's like, barback? But yeah, that guy. And he's like, we're pretty full up, man, but drop your resume off tomorrow. You never know. So when I woke up, I vaguely remembered that guy saying, bring back a resume. So I wrote all the bars I drank at in college, but I just switched to actually working there and dropped it off. He's like, hey, man, funny enough, we fired our bar back last night. Can you start tonight? I'm like, yeah. And, this is back in the early 90s. This is in an era when literally every time someone ordered a drink for me, and they would let me pour sometimes, I'm like, hey, this group of girls just ordered these shots called blah. And he's like, just make it red. I'm like, is it red? He's like, no one's going to know the difference, man. Just make it sweet and red. And that advice got me through probably my first 5 years of bartending. And then
you are absolutely not the first person I've heard almost the exact same story from. Yeah, just make it red or pink.
Yeah.
Make it sweet enough. It'll fly.
It literally Rose's grenadine kept him in business for decades, man.
It really was a different world. And then, I worked in a bunch of different places. I actually worked in a place called the Martini Lounge. And the one thing not on our menu was a martini, because this was, again, the 90s. So our martinis were apple martini, Cosmo, lemon drop. No actual martini existed on this menu. I owned a nightclub briefly. And then I started working at this bar, which was the bar I would hang out at. It was, to me, it's the greatest bar known to man. And I just happened to know people over time. And when I sold out of my nightclub, a bartender there was moving. So I started bar managing. And you guys are New York guys. So Sean McPherson owns the Bowery, the Maritime, the Waverly. Mm-hmm. So this is his first bar in LA called Jones. I ended up being there for about 15 years. And when I first got there, it was still sort of old school cocktail world. And then I got to go on a brand trip in the very early days of brand trips. And there was 5 guys from San Fran on that trip. And I just remember hearing them talk about cocktails and Jacques and Duggan and Manny, and they're all making bitters and using egg whites. I'm like, what the fuck are they talking about? None of this exists in LA. And I got back to LA, bought Dale DeGrauff's first book, and told my bar manager, I'm like, hey, San Francisco's a 45-minute flight. If this is happening there, we might want to rethink what we're doing. So we immediately went to Fresh Juices. And then the place I worked at was never and should never be a suspender type cocktail bar. But there was no reason we didn't make the best version of whatever we're making: old fashions, margaritas, martinis. So just kind of redid everything, reset what we were doing, and place just turned 30 and it's never been busier. So it just kind of kept up. It's called Jones, so it kept up with the Joneses to the point it needed to. Hey-o. And but it's that's kind of where it started. It's just, I just fell in love with, it wasn't the cocktails at first. I mean, that came later, and it's really cool that the cocktail revolution happened and we have better drinks to make and we have better ingredients to use. But the camaraderie between your coworkers, but also your guests. Like, I have so many friends that I met behind the bar, and so many stories of people that I've come through my life or I've come through their life. And 30 years later, I'm like, I'm still friends with these people. And I don't know a lot of industries that have that kind of love for each other that we have in the bar world. And even with it's not just about us. Obviously the guests are the most important thing. And just to be able to have lived through that from pre-cocktails to post-cocktails. And the one thing that stayed the same was the guest is number one. And if you make them happy, you'll be Jones and still be in business 30 years later.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And the adaptability, right? The ability to change and stay relevant. It's pretty fascinating to watch places evolve, and just equally as fascinating to watch places like stay stagnant and then sadly disappear. I have at least one question burning in me based on that answer, though. You said you sold a TV show,
yeah,
and then you just left that field altogether. You have never done that again,
ish. So I moved out to LA to work with this childhood friend. Families were friends, like we knew each other in the summers, basically. And he was a child actor and was hosting some kid show. And he was like, come out to LA, let's start a company, let's do this, let's do that. So I moved out there and did all said things, sold a show. It only lasted like 12 episodes, and we just had grown apart. He's not here, so I'm just going to say there's 3 sides to every story. But the right thing happened. He went on to do what he does. And I did, I took some writing in college. I started doing a lot of writing, and I did screenplays for a long time, and made a little bit of money and success doing that. But it was right around the time that I started Dirty Sue, and then Dirty Sue started doing well. So I kind of had, I was running a bar, I was writing, and I was trying to launch a company. So something had to give. So I kind of put writing on the back burner. And I guess to our benefit, right? So I guess that's a great segue. Thank you. Let's talk about Dirty Sue. What was your opening salvo? What was your original product, and why did you decide to make that one? And then now you've got more that have come out. Yeah, I mean, I guess necessity, right, was the mother of invention as well in this situation. Dirty Martinis probably have never been more popular than today, but when I started the company, they were still really popular. And I think that's that just holds true. They were never more popular on that day either. Right. They've just continued to be so popular. Yeah, right? For sure. And I think when I first started at Jones, we were still pouring the olive juice over the olives in the olive tray. So when somebody ordered a dirty martini, you literally had to put your hand over the tray and then let the olive juice drip through your fingers to get into someone's martini. And then
it's the only way to properly season the juice, man.
I mean, come on.
I don't know the scientific explanation.
That's how Jerry Thomas did it.
Yeah. So
I don't know the scientific explanation, but your fingers made it good.
Yes, it's a salty drink. So what's a little more hand sweat? So then obviously we went to a squeeze bottle, like any non-heathen. But one night I was working and I only have myself to blame because we had no bar back on, I think it was a Monday or Tuesday. And so I set the bar up. So I should have known that I had an open gallon of olives, full of olives with no juice when I set the bar up, but didn't decide to get a new jar. And finally someone ordered the 1030 martini and I went to the tray, or I guess the squeeze bottle at that point, and it was empty, and go back to the jar. I'm like, oh yeah. So I have to leave the bar, go to the liquor room, get another gallon of olives, hands wet, struggle to get that thing open because they're not made to open. And, it took me, 10 minutes to make a 45-second drink. And I finally putting the drink down. I'm like, how the fuck has no one bottled olive juice? And then a light bulb went off. And as soon as I had a break, I went online and just confirmed that nobody was bottling olive juice. And I'm like, I must do this. And I'll tell you this, this was earlier days of the internet. It was very, very difficult to Google buy olive juice in bulk. It just, I literally had to find.
Well, imagine if you were saying olive juice at that time, everything was coming up oil, right? Olive juice is olive oil. But to get the brine from pickling the olives just without the olives. Yeah.
Yeah. It was really, what I didn't realize, everyone was like, blah, blah, blah farms. And in my head, if you say you're Sother Farms, then you actually have a farm where you grow things. But all of these quote unquote farms were just buying product from importers and other farms. So no one had enough brine to sell.
Have you ever been to Hidden Valley Ranch?
Yeah, exactly.
Neither a ranch nor a valley.
I don't think it's a real ranch.
Yeah, exactly.
Nor is it hidden for that matter.
And they try to keep that hidden. But 6 months in, I was like, this is why there's no bottled olive juice, because you can't get olive juice or brine. And I had one number left, and it was a farm in California. And I called, and it was a family farm, and they've been in business at that point about 25 years. And the guy's like, come on up. We got acres and acres. We import from all over the world. And I went up, and here's this guy and his wife and their daughter and a couple other people. And true to form, he had everything I needed. The one thing that we did, which 20 years later, I'm glad, he's like, here's my brine. And I'm like, it's fine. Yeah, like it tasted just like what was in the jar, which is salty water. And this is before the cocktail thing, but I'm just like, is there could I do something better? So my product was a little bit stands taller than the rest. And I didn't want to change it so much where people that like dirty martinis, like, what's this? But is there a better version? Is there the non-margarita mix of fresh lime juice version of olive brine?
Right, sort of the platonic brine.
Right. So he's like, I think we can mess around with some stuff. So he's like, give me a couple weeks. I went back up, and him and the guy that ran his farm had all these different ratios and variations and different olives. And finally it kind of concocted the Dirty Stew recipe. And a buddy of mine I grew up with was a graphic designer, and he had just left like a big firm. So he was freelance, and, we came up with a label, and, coming up with a name was a whole other chore because, when you see Dirty Stew, it sounds really, naughty and nefarious. But I was living in a duplex in West Hollywood, and I'm sitting there like, dirty something dirty. I wanted it to link to the Dirty Martini. And I had a beach cruiser bike behind the sofa. So hashtag still single. And the frame of the bike had like a World War II pinup girl painted on it. And it said the Flying Sioux, like the nose of a bomber. And I'm like, oh, that's kind of cool. Dirty Sioux. That has a nice ring to it. And at the time, like, oh, pinup girl, it's classic Americana, and that's where it all came from. And I literally thought, overnight success. What bartender doesn't want to put a pour spout in a premium olive juice versus the fingers in the thing? And I had a meeting with Southern Wine and Spirits in LA. And it was really funny because the VP that was in the meeting, obviously it was a new thing. It wasn't anything he'd seen before. So he's like trying to rack his brain. Do we want this? Do we not want this? And some guy walks in. This is on the executive floor, so everyone's in suits. And this guy walks in the office in jeans and a flannel. Just doesn't even knock. And he picks up the bottle. He goes, oh, this is interesting. Opens the cork, smells it, goes, this seems pretty cool, and walks out of the office. And the guy goes, well, if he likes it, I guess we'll take it. And years later, I remember asking him, do you remember who? He's like, no, I remember that happening. I don't remember who that was. I want to like hug that man. So, I got picked up in SoCal, and I literally thought that was so easy. Like, I'll be retired in a year. And started hitting so many roadblocks. There were so many bar managers that never bartended, and their stance was, why would I buy something I get for free? And then me saying, well, you get it for free. How good could it possibly be? Like, would you serve free whiskey and free wine? How good was that going to be? But I started just handing out. I'm like, hey, give these bottles to your bartender on a Friday, and Monday morning, if they hate it, don't call me. And usually 9 out of 10 times I get a call like, hey, and forgetting the quality, it was more of like, I was a bartender. Hey, I can put a pour spout on this and skip 3 steps of setting up the bar. Mm-hmm. Ready to rock and roll.
Well, also there's this weird fallacy out there. I think that, like, using olives as the example here, of course, yeah, sure, the brine is in the jar already, but there's not as much brine as I'm going to need to make as many martinis as I would need to use those olives.
Correct.
So there's an imbalance.
Yeah.
So at the very least, you could appeal to that notion and be like, sure, so buy a few bottles of Dirty Sue to augment that ratio.
Yeah.
Right?
I mean, that was our whole
eventually
pitch.
They'd probably peel off.
We had in the beginning, it was the 4 C's of Dirty Sue, right? Cleanliness, convenience, and one of them was cost effective, because those jars of olives are not cheap. And if you're I'd say conservatively, we threw away about a third of every jar of olives because they just rotted when they were dry. And so, and olive brine it's not like I'm selling 15-year-old whiskey. This is not an expensive proposition. So I think it started catching on. And I remember one of the guys I was on that San Fran trip, years later, he said, you were kind of ahead of the curve. People weren't looking for better premium, and thankfully the bar world kind of caught up, because I'd never been busier. I thought it was all going to happen when I started, but it's taken me a couple of decades to become that overnight success I was hoping for.
Yeah, that's always the thing, right? It takes a decade to be an overnight success, and maybe more. I have a question, though, that's still based on what we just said. You're right. You'd empty the jar of olives. I remember these days in my bartending career, and then there's no brine on them, so they're drying and they're going to go to waste. So where are you sourcing all this brine? Where do the olives go?
Right.
Now we're in the flip side of the equation.
So good question. So when you look at the brine in that gallon you get from your food broker, or unless you're, or even spending for a better olive, that's called pack brine. That is manipulated and stretched out from the actual brine the olives are aged in. Mm-hmm. There's very little actual olive brine in those olive jars. So that's why it's very, very salty and barely any olive, which is, without revealing the secrets of Dirty Sue, one of the things I wanted to do when I created the brand was make a better version. So I'm only using the brine from top grade olives. I'm using more of what's in the barrels that they're aged in. So you're getting that salt you love, but a more olive forward flavor and a much larger depth of flavor. So even though it's still the olive brine, it's just a better version of what you're getting out of the jar, which was the goal from day one. And it's served well, because to this day, people still say that Dirty Sue olive juice is the best way to make a dirty martini.
Sure. I mean, basically what you're saying is, on the grand scale, from whoever's doing the big pickling of olives, that stuff is just more concentrated than what gets packed into the jar that we get at the shop. You're taking something kind of from that main source, that concentrated source, and kind of blending it down to make what you put in the bottle.
You couldn't drink, or you wouldn't want to drink straight from the barrel. It's
right. It'd be like too astringent or too
it's super, but pickly. The stretch on the stuff in the olive jar is really just there to keep the olives from going bad. I don't think anyone thought back in the day, like, oh, this is going to be a great byproduct to make cocktails. And then, true or not true, FDR kind of gets credit for splashing a bit of olive juice into his martini the first time. So as it grew in popularity, that stuff in the jar became the only thing to have, because no one thought, no one was doing anything different.
Right. Well, I just cracked open this bottle, and it immediately smells of like pungent olive. And I got this stupid little Yarai mixing glass that I have. These tiny
Beautiful.
It costs more than the full size ones. It's got a slight amber looking hue. Maybe I don't know. I'm colorblind, but it's not just clear like water. But it smells great, and it is very sharply salty and olivey. Not like the stuff that comes out of the jar.
Man.
Yeah.
Yeah, not like the stuff that comes out of the jar.
Right, and that's
So I can also imagine you have to you can use a considerable amount less.
Yes,
when you're making that dirty martini
for sure. So it's, I think my
Super
recommended to
my
people.
salivary glands are in high gear right now.
Yeah, I usually tell people start with a half ounce. You can always add more. You can't take it out, and most people don't use as much dirty Sue as they might use the stuff from the jar, because it is just a little bit more concentrated. And there's a lot more flavor packed in there because of it. So it a little bit goes a long way. And then because it has a lot of flavor, it's been fun to experiment. It's great in a Bloody Mary. It's, I make, when salinity became a big thing in cocktails, when we started, it was big fat salt rims on a margarita. So now what I do is I dilute dirty Sue with like a nice spring water, and then use a dropper so you can really get the exact amount of salinity you want to balance citrus. And, just for a fun, stupid name, I call it angel tears. So you just add a couple angel tears to your margarita or Paloma or any kind of citrus forward cocktail.
Do you ever get tempted to go the other way and kind of like desalinate it, and then you have sort of like a olive brine sea salt thing that you can rim drinks with? Is that a thing you've ever played around with?
Yeah, well, I haven't played around yet. I've called many salt companies to try to figure out how to make what you're calling an olive salt. And what my original thought was to just dehydrate dirty Sue, which didn't seem like anyone had those machines. But now what I think would work is just taking a really good sea salt, and none of my competitors listen to your podcast, right? So I'm not giving away any genius ideas.
Nah. I'm not sure anyone listens to this podcast, really, but we're still here.
But what I think you could do is take a really high quality sea salt, dump dirty Sue, like marinate the salt in dirty Sue, and then dry that. And now you'll have an olive brined salt, almost double salted in a way. And I think that could be really fun for cocktail rims or Bloody Mary salts and things like that. And then even using it in cooking.
Sure.
Yeah. That's
sure, or like
salty sounding salt.
Yep.
Maybe not dehydrating, but freeze drying some actual olives and then powder, crushing those into almost a powder and folding those into a salt as well.
You could do that too, probably.
Excuse me. Former chef. Always thinking about cooking stuff.
Well, I kind of wanted to ask, because honestly, this is something that I'm going through as well with the agave nectar brand that I own and run. And one thing that's very like frustrating, I guess, is kind of knowing that people like this. It's just, you kind of have to you really have to lead that horse to water. It sounds like from what you're describing in the early days of Dirty Sue, you're like, people are going to like this better than what they're doing, but I just have to like wrap their heads around it for them.
Yes.
Sometimes, did that ever get frustrating? And like, how in the early days did you kind of power through that?
Super frustrating.
Asking for a friend.
Yes. Super frustrating. Look, when you start a company, you make mistakes, and I made a lot. And the first mistake I made was another buddy built my website, and it was 100% Flash. And in modern times, we now know that Google and everyone doesn't read Flash. So we did a launch party 20 years ago next month, and we're in LA, so a lot of celebrities came out, and through friends of friends, Christina Aguilera shows up to this party and stops in front of the Dirty Sue step and repeat. God bless her for doing that. And that picture ended up in like Japanese newspapers. And I got call.
We're big in Japan.
Yeah, huge. But so many calls. One, I didn't have any way to get them Dirty Sue. I only had distribution in Southern California. The stuff I sold off my website, I had no idea how to package glass. I was literally taking a case to not even a UPS store. I don't know if they existed yet, like a mom and pop shipping store paying their VIG to package this and ship it. I was losing about $30 a case every time, but I wanted to make sure people got it if they wanted it. And that never raised my like page count. I was still on like page 10 because no one was reading my website. So that was frustrating, but that was my own dumb fault. And then in terms of what you're really asking, how do you make people aware of something you know they're going to like when they're not paying attention? And a lot of it was trade shows and friends in the bar. Like I would send everyone and anyone that would ask or not ask samples. I remember meeting Jeffrey Morgenthaler online back when he still lived in Eugene, Oregon, and he just started out with his blog. And I remember reading it a couple of times, like, this kid's pretty funny. Like, and I'm like, I should reach out to him. And I'm like, well, it's in Eugene, Oregon. Where's that? Right. And I'm like, oh yeah, it's the internet. So I reach out and send him samples. He wrote like this really great review to his readers. And then the first two comments, I believe, was Tony Abugano and Gary Regan. I'm like, oh, I guess it was a good move sending him Dirty Sue. And, we've been friends ever since. But in the beginning, I would sit up on Sunday nights and I would look up martini blogs and just like, hey, you love martinis, check this out. And I would send samples. And, maybe 2 out of 10 people would respond to me and the rest would just ignore me like this crazy drunk guy trolling the internet at Sunday night at 4 a.m. But it started building a little bit of a groundswell and I started getting write-ups and it planted a lot of seeds. It just took those olive trees a long time to grow. But I just kept planting seeds every day. I'd wake up and say, what could I do today that's going to make me have a better company than I had yesterday? And it didn't happen overnight, but it's starting to happen now.
Yeah, everything happens in the same way, slowly at first, then really quickly, which seems like where you're at. I definitely want to talk about what's coming next and what other products you have, because I can see a couple of them sitting right there on your table.
Yeah,
but I want to jump back just for a second here and point out to the listener and to me, I wasn't aware that you are the creator of the Surfer on Acid cocktail.
Correct.
Where and when did that happen? It was the 90s for sure.
Yeah. So my first, I guess, bartending job, the place I bar back where Make It Red, that place started not being great. And I got into this other club as a bartender in the kitchen. They had a service bar for the servers. And because, I lied my way in again, and I knew more now, but I didn't know a lot. I had flashcards in my back pocket. Waiters would fuck with me all night long. But the GM came by and he ordered what did he get? A kamikaze, which was huge back then. He wanted it on the rocks. I didn't know what it was. So I walked in like, oh, I need to get something out of there. And I'm like going through my cards and it said lime juice. I didn't realize, being the early 90s, that they meant roses. So I'm hand squeezing lime juices and sugar and made him this kamikaze with fresh lime juice. And he's like, thank you, walks away. And I see him take a sip, turn back around. And he goes, that's the best fucking kamikaze I ever had. And the next week I was on the main bar because by accident I used fresh lime juice. And so then, I was
out there accidentally pioneering.
But, I don't even think I made the connection of why he liked it. But right. In retrospect, I do. And then I was in the fire. I mean, I was in the well that everyone came up the steps to the nightclub and I'm, ringing like crazy. So you got to learn really quick. And then on slow nights, me and this other guy would just try this shot. And all of them were terrible. And one night, Jaeger had become pretty popular. And coming from the early 90s, I wasn't ready for that palate explosion of bitterness and non-sweet flavoring. So I was like, I wonder how I could mask Jaeger, because I wasn't ready for Jaeger. And growing up, my family had like a secret family pina colada recipe. So I was always akin to pineapple and coconut. So every drink I couldn't figure out, I'm like, pineapple and coconut, that'll work. And it always tasted good. So at least to me, because those are flavors I like. So I'm like, this guy like, hey, I wonder if this my pineapple coconut trick's going to work on Jaeger. So I mixed it and we're like, it's pretty good. Like, and that was like our house shot. So people come to the bar, we just make these drinks. Pretty sure I was calling it ET's awesome shot, super humbly. And one night, a bunch of like 20 somethings come to the bar, like 10 dudes. And they're like, we need 10 Surfer on acids. I'm like, what the fuck is that? Like, it's Baileys and banana schnapps and cream and Kahlua. And like, it was like litany of ingredients. So I'm making it. The bar is disgusting. They're hammered. And I give them their shots. I'm like, what bar makes this awful concoction? I'm like, no, man, we were in my dad's basement last night. We're just pulling stuff out of his cabinet and we made this up. I'm like, then you walk into a bar and order, like, I'm going to know what it is. So I'm like discussing with them, cleaning up this mess, and they're walking away. I'm like, well, that shot is never going to take off, but it's a pretty good name. So I took that name and put it on my shot. And I think I told one other bartender that didn't work at this club in LA what the shot was. And that was back in Philly. And a friend of mine was bartending and he's like, oh, what's big in LA? I'm like, oh, Surfer on Acid's huge. So, I tell him the recipe, and a couple years later, it was in every kind of like college-y dive bar. And I never could figure it out because it wasn't the two people I told. There's no, I knew that much. And years later, I was judging a cocktail contest and some guy comes up to me and he's like, you the Dirty Sue guy? I'm like, yeah. He goes, so you created the Surfer on Acid? I was like, yeah. And he's like, I was the Jaeger rep in LA in the 80s and 90s. And we had heard there was another drink with Jaeger that wasn't just a shot of Jaeger. And then Sidney Frank, the original owner importer, was in LA. And I guess this guy brought Sidney Frank to the bar and they put it on their recipe card. So they were out there putting the drink into the world. And that's how it got around.
And it's great. I love it. I'm a huge Jaeger fan. I feel like Jägermeister is sort of a cornerstone to my bar, More Amargo. Like, I don't think we would have had our as much initial success as we had if we didn't feature Jaeger, because at least it was a foothold. Right. It was a place where people who could come in and they'd see a bottle they recognized, whether they liked it or not, they recognized it. So then we have. Yeah,
I mean, by the way, I grew to like it. I just that was a much different taste profile than what was happening in the 90s. Yeah.
But it was striking hard because Sidney Frank was behind it and pushing really hard to get it out there and, marketing it towards, young dudes mostly. But obviously it worked. They're the 9th largest liquor brand in the world. Yeah. Not for nothing. Well, that's awesome, man. I had no idea. It was one of those drinks that, of course, I've had it. I just thought it was, honestly, like the martini. Like, who the fuck invented that? Nobody knows. It just exists. I don't think I knew that there was never thought to myself to be like, wonder who came up with this drink. And then you sent us your dossier and I looked it up and lo and behold, it was you. So that's pretty fucking great. But let's get back to Dirty Sue. So we've got the olive brine in a bottle, but I see a couple more things on your table there. What else you got and what do you got coming in the future?
So it made sense to do olives, and the farm.
It's funny, right? It's like you're going backwards.
Right.
They want to separate the olives from the brine, but then now we want to make the olives
exactly. And the farm, I was making the brine. I had them send me samples of their olives, and the olives were great, but the stuffings I didn't love. So I called him like, hey, I don't, the cheese is a little dry or this. And he's like, yeah, we can get the cheese you want, but you'd be the only client asking for it. And then the prices skyrocket. So I kind of put a pin in that. And then years later, another farm importer contacted me and we're just in talks. I was like, if I keep growing, it might be nice to know someone else that could maybe do this for me just in case. And the guy that owned the farm where Dirty Sue was created called me. He's like, hey, I'm looking to retire. I'm looking to sell my business. One of his clients was gigantic. He's like, do you know anybody? I'm like, I do actually. So I put them in touch, and the other guy bought the California farm's basically business. And I said, hey, can you send me samples of your olives? And the funny thing was they were importing olives from the same exact places, but the other guy was using Wisconsin cheeses and much higher end ingredients. So I'm like, oh, so then I'm like, now I feel good about putting these out in the market. They're top quality olives with top quality ingredients, and finally worked on a cherry, even though it has no bearing on a dirty martini. It's still in the garnish world, and
of course,
whiskeys,
portfolio diversification is
so
necessary.
These are USA grown cherries, and the next thing that's coming down the pipe for our 20th anniversary is another brine, and you New Yorkers guessed it, pickle brine. So
love it.
I resisted for a long time because picklebacks didn't really grow the way I thought they would. And I also didn't have a recipe that I loved. And now I do. And it's starting to get another life, and it's starting to find itself in other drinks besides the pickleback. Some people are using it for dirty martinis. Some people are using it in Bloody Mary mixes. Some people are just using it to hydrate. So I feel like for the 20th, it'd be, to go back to where I started and put another brine out in the market.
Yeah, that's pretty awesome. And pickle brine does find its way because like shrubs are so popular still, right? And that's effectively what you got going there with pickle brine. You can use it in a lot of ways and a lot of things. When will that 20th anniversary? When is that?
So it's this year. This summer I think I started the company in 2003, but I didn't launch till 2004, and the launch party was summer 2004. And I'm hoping to have all my artwork is done. And the original designer redid everything again. So I'm looking to do a little refresh on the labels and come out with the brine. And hopefully at Tails, I'll have samples of everything.
Oh, right on.
Because that's kind of where I started with the brand to begin. Like back when Tails was parties in hotel suites to get kicked out, before it became what it is now. So I think it'd be kind of nice to bring some of these samples
Parties
out
in
to
bigger
Tails.
hotel suites you get kicked out of.
What's that?
Yeah, exactly.
Parties in bigger hotel suites you get kicked out of.
And Airbnbs.
Yes.
And Airbnbs.
All that good stuff.
Yeah. Lots of Airbnb parties going on.
Yeah. But yeah, so I think it'd be fun to bring some of these samples there just to kind of preview what's coming. And but yeah, pretty excited about it. And the brand itself, it started as like only in friends bars. Now I'm in national accounts, which is crazy. I'll never forget, I was still working at Jones, and a couple came to the bar, and the woman ordered a dirty martini. So I made it, and check, how's your cocktails? You guys doing good? She goes, oh my God, it's one of the best dirty martinis I've ever had. So I did what I always would do, is just hold up the bottle of Dirty Sue and like, this is our secret. And she goes, that's so funny. I'm like, why? She goes, I was at a bar 2 weeks ago, and I told the bartender I loved my dirty martini, and he did the same thing. And this is pretty early on, so I'm assuming this is a buddy of mine that has Dirty Sue. And I'm like, do you remember what bar you are at? She goes, I remember what the bartender's name was. She goes, it was Matt at this bar in Riverside, and I'd never even been to Riverside in my life, let alone know bars or bartenders there. So the next morning, I called the bar, and I'm like, is Matt there? Like, Matt manager, Matt bartender? I'm like, Matt bartender. He gets on. I'm like, hey man, it's ET from Dirty Sue. He's like, oh hi. Like I was like that meant something to anyone. And I was like, hey, one of your customers I met, and she told me how graciously you showed my bottle and said we use Dirty Sue here. I just want to say thank you and send you a little care package. And it was great. Like that guy kept in touch with me for his whole bartending career, and every time he moved jobs, hey, I'm at this bar now, and we'd send samples out. And but that was the first moment where it was not something I did directly that got Dirty Sue in a bar. And I was like, oh, yeah, maybe people might like this.
I think staying humble is certainly an approach, but you've been around for 20 years. You can brag a little now. Right? You don't have to be quite so humble.
Hey man,
listen, man, the stuff
we're in Cheesecake Factory. Is that a good brag?
There you go. Yeah, that's
it is.
That is
you're
success
meeting
right
the people
there.
where they're at. You know what I mean?
It's
you know how many people.
I mean, we're at
in
Mastro's
a week?
On that end, right? Like, super schmancy steakhouse and Cheesecake, which just won best restaurant chain a couple months ago, and that took 18 years to get in a Cheesecake Factory. I literally, a friend of a friend years ago knew the bar trainer that would go around to all the cheesecakes and like teach the bartenders how to make the Cheesecake Factory cocktails. And he's like, we got to go give him a bottle of Dirty Sue. So we went, gave him a bottle, and kind of the end of that story. And then ran into him a couple years later, stayed friendly, ran into him a little bit later, stayed friendly. And then last summer he texted me, he's like, hey, you still involved in Dirty Sue? I'm like, yeah. He goes, who do I talk to about cheesecake? I'm like, me? And, send samples. They do all their due diligence. And now we're in all cheesecake factories.
I mean, that's incredible. Like
Wow.
you think like how many human beings, literal people, sit and dine at the Cheesecake Factory in a given week. And that's going to, you talk about fancy, right? That's going to eclipse probably what, like, I don't know, Le Bernardin does in possibly a year.
Yeah. And, look.
And that's one Cheesecake Factory.
Yeah.
And there's dozens of
them.
So,
look, they've been a great partner. And they're all, like, my wife was in Baltimore recently and her family, they're all at Cheesecake Factory. And my wife says to the server, hey, do you know what you use for your dirty martinis? Because it was just rolling out, so they might not have had it yet. And she goes, I don't know. Let me go find out. So she comes back and she said, the bartender very proudly told me we use something called Dirty Sue. And my wife was like, oh.
I mean, even that's another mark in your advantage, right? The bartender proudly told me. She didn't have to say that.
Yeah.
But he obviously made such a deal out of it to this server that she went and
look, it's been amazing. My father's no longer with us, but when they moved back into the city many, many years ago, him and my mom were looking for their local. My parents were the couple that sat at the bar. They never, unless they're with a group of people, they never sat at a table. They like to talk to the bartender, meet friends. So they had this super dive bar that it's been around. It's so old. There's that trough under the bar stools. So back in the day, men didn't need to get.
Yes.
Yeah, you know what I'm talking about.
Yes.
So it's not in use now, but it still exists. And my dad would vacillate. Like some nights he's in the mood for a dirty martini, some nights he's in the mood for whiskey. And he's kind of in a dirty martini mood, and they're at this super dive, and he's like, this probably is not the place to get a dirty martini, right? Like it's probably been sitting in that little olive, tray. So the guys,
I mean, it's going to be dirty, all right, but just
dirty
not
and
the way you want.
Warm and, so the guy's like, what do you want? And my dad's like, it's like random question. He goes, what do you guys use to make your dirty martinis here? And the guy's like, tonight, if you order one, it's going to be out of the tray. He goes, but when the owner thinks of it, when he's in New Jersey, he buys something called Dirty Sue. And my dad was like, the proudest papa moment you've ever seen.
You made it, son. Yeah. You're in the dive bar. Well, listen, we're running out of time here, but how can our listener follow along with what you're doing at Dirty Sue, and how can they then reach out to you if they want to get some Dirty Sue at their bar or in their home?
Yeah, so, Instagram, go to @DrinkDirtySue. Go to dirtysue.com and shoot us a note. We'll get back to you probably same day. We'll let you know if we're distributed in your state. If for some reason we're not, we can set you up with wholesale pricing on the website directly. And, we'll do whatever we can do to make someone that wants Dirty Sue get Dirty Sue.
I mean, from this entire conversation, that seems to be the crux of it all. You're in the early days, you were shipping it out at a loss just so you could get it into people's hands.
Yeah, like you come from the bar world, right? What's our goal? Make someone happy. Like that guest comes in, they have $1 in their pocket. They chose to spend it at your bar. You kind of owe them the courtesy of making their life a little bit better than it was before they walked in. And I just took that philosophy from bartending into business and said, hey, if Dirty Sue is going to make their life better, I want to make sure they get it.
Awesome. Well, we'll get a couple of recipes from you and we'll make them for our Patreon. And yeah, we'll look forward to seeing Dirty Sue all over the place, and especially getting ready to see the pickle brine come out at Tales this year.
Awesome. I appreciate
Very excited for that pickle brine. Very, very excited.
Yeah, me too. So thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it. Good catching up with you guys.
Yeah, man. Really appreciate your time.
This has been super fun. And thank you to you, the listener, for tuning in. We always really appreciate it. And if you want to hear more content that we don't always air on our main show, you can become a regular at Bottled and Bond. We got a link in the show notes for how to join that. And in the meantime, whether you are a regular or you're just stopping by, we got Michael Arades coming in next week, talking about a project that he's going to be launching in June. So that's going to be a super cool show and very, very excited for that. And
a fun kickoff to Pride Month.
And a fun kickoff to Pride Month. That's true. Yeah, he's going to be he's a great guest. I'm really, really excited to have him in here and hear what he's working on. But for now, that's going to do it for us on the Speakeasy. So from me, Sother, and ET, until next time, cheers, everybody.
Cheers, everybody.
Bye-bye.
So you don't charm the devil with your rock.
The Speakeasy is powered by Simplecast. Thanks for listening to Heritage Radio Network. Food and drink radio supported by you. Keep in touch at heritageradionetwork.org/subscribe.
It's gonna get you sun in the air.
Hi, listeners. We want to tell you about a podcast we're really digging. It's called Christopher Kimball's Milk Street Radio. Every week, they travel the world to find the most fascinating stories about food, including children who harvest cod tongues after school in Norway and a detective who tracks down food thieves. And on Milk Street Radio, you can always find the unexpected. The comedian who ranks apples using an elaborate 100-point system, the secret history of grocery stores, and how to eat your way through Italy. They also interview the most beloved names in food like Jacques Pepin, Sola El-Whaley, Jose Andres, Jet Tila, Ina Garten, Nigella Lawson, and Padma Lakshmi. Plus, co-hosts Christopher Kimball and Sarah Moulton do live calls with listeners and answer their questions about ingredients, techniques, and culinary mysteries. Like, why roasting a leg of lamb made one caller's oven explode? Ever wonder why your bread won't rise or your souffle falls flat? Chris and Sarah have the answers. You'll also hear from a rotating cast of contributors, including Kenji Lopez-Alt, Cheryl Day, Dan Pashman from The Sporkful, and Alex Ainuz, a French guy cooking from YouTube. Take a listen at 177milkstreet.com/radio or just search your podcast app for Milk Street Radio.